world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the afternoon agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now this show is all about your opinion and a little bit of mine. So it's not news as you know it. We discuss and debate things that really need to be on your agenda. So with that in mind, here's what we're covering today. The missing children of lockdown. Following our special on Arthur Labinjo Hughes yesterday, we speak to a senior Tory who says tens of thousands of other kids are at risk following lockdown. And the Afghanistan whistleblower who says, don't know what he says. He says that the rescue operation has been a catastrophe. We'll be getting you more on that. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we really need to talk about conversion therapy. Does a proposed ban risk actually criminalising well-meaning therapists helping young people who are confused about their gender identity? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Simon Pusey. This is your news at 4 o'clock. Yellow weather warnings for wind and snow are in place across almost all of the country as Storm Barra hits. Winds of almost 70 miles per hour have been recorded off the southwest coast of England. The storm has also caused flooding in southwest Ireland. In western Scotland and northwest England, drivers have been warned of potentially hazardous conditions. Our home editor Mark White is in one of the affected regions in Scotland where Storm Barra is hitting hard.
We're in the heart of the Scottish borders on the A7 trunk route between Carlisle and Edinburgh, and Storm Barra has arrived. It's snowing pretty heavily now, and the added hazard are the winds, which are really whipping up now and likely to cause significant drifting on the higher routes.
A very chilly Mark White there. Well, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is warning the new COVID variant Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta strain. This comes as 101 new Omicron cases have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total number to 437. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is encouraging people in Scotland to work from home, as cases there have risen by 11% in the past week. One of the suspects involved in the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has been arrested in France. Mr. Khashoggi was killed in 2018 after entering the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. He had previously been critical of Saudi officials. Police detained a man at an airport near Paris as he was about to board a flight to Riyadh. Local media are reporting the person was a former royal guard of Saudi Arabia. A Whitehall whistleblower has accused the government of costing lives in its evacuation of people from Afghanistan. Raphael Marshall worked for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. He says just 5% of Afghans who asked the UK to help them flee the country as it fell to the Taliban actually received assistance. He also claims some of those left behind were then killed. Former ambassador to Afghanistan, Sir Laurie Bairstow, said British authorities struggled to predict the number of people needing evacuation.
In terms of the numbers, this was always, I think, I hesitate to describe it in these terms, but as a known unknown. We did not know how many people would come forward on the day for evacuation, if that's what it came to, because we did not know how many British passport holders were in Afghanistan on any one day. We had no way of knowing.
Airport-style security is going to be installed in all new prisons as part of a government crackdown on drugs. The zero-tolerance approach in England and Wales will see body scanners, biometric identification and sniffer dogs used on both visitors and staff to try and keep dangerous substances out of jails. And prisoners will be assessed on arrival for drug and alcohol addiction.
Young people, and it's almost invariably young men, end up in prison. That cannot be a dead end for them. And we want to stop the drugs coming in, so we're putting in a lot of money for scanners, but we also want them to come out with more qualifications and more self-esteem about their chances in the future.
COVID has affected children in the northeast more than anywhere else in the country, leaving them more disadvantaged in health and education. The new research, called Child of the North, found those children have a 27% chance of living in poverty compared to 20% in the rest of England. Speaking to GB News, Professor Kate Pickett said there were many factors involved.
Because they had more risk factors for poor outcomes prior to the pandemic, and because they actually experienced longer lockdowns than children in much of the rest of the country, those poor outcomes have been exacerbated. So some of it's due to poverty and family livelihoods being lost, some of it is due to loss of schooling, some of it is due to mental health problems. But COVID-19 has exacerbated the north-south divide that we were already experiencing for our children in the north.
And long-serving Labour MP Harriet Harman has announced that she's stepping down at the next general election. Britain's longest-serving female MP was first elected in 1982 and is known as the Mother of the House of Commons. She served in numerous cabinet and shadow cabinet positions, including Leader of the House of Commons under Gordon Brown. In a tweet, she said it had been an honour to represent Camberwell and Peckham for almost 40 years. You're right up to date. Now back to the afternoon agenda with Alex.
Now, unless you are a medieval brute or ardent religious fanatic, you probably wholly agree that gay conversion therapy was a whole world of wrong. Gay people being encouraged to self-flagellate, agreeing to be tortured, even raped, often drugged and performing superstitious exorcism-like rituals is the stuff of witchcraft, not modern medicine in a tolerant society. And so, we should all applaud the government's enthusiasm to rush through legislation outlawing the barbaric practice. Or should we? Because the government have apparently become so eager to wokely appease the new bête noire of a truly tolerant society in the form of Stonewall, the once pioneering organisation for gay equality that has latterly become the blinkered blight on long-held women's rights, that it has foolhardily slashed legal consultation time for a slate of new laws from a full 12 weeks to just 6, forcing what may turn out to be critical small print to be swept along with the rising tide of vacuous virtue signalling, as so much of their slapdash policy seems to do. But this time, it's tragically serious. Because the new legislation also includes valid treatment of the 21st century's trendiest condition, body dysphoria. Why does this matter? Well, unlike permitting perverse quack therapies that purport to somehow make homosexual people straight, the treatment for patients presenting with questions about their gender identity is, quite rightly, initiated psychologically, given that the matter is entirely a mental one. The NHS already mandates that anybody who questions their sex should be automatically affirmed and encouraged to begin the pathway to transition rather than undergo counselling to explore the psychological landscape and seek to reverse it. But if this becomes enshrined in law, any therapist who wishes to assist a patient with counselling to treat their dysphoria with the end goal of being at ease with their sex at birth could be accused of committing a crime. Yep. Now add that into a context where, despite historically the incidence of gender dysphoria is 3 times more prevalent among men than women, an astronomical spike in online encouragement of young women to bind their breasts, reject their gender, and solve their problems by physically transitioning to become male means that a worldwide phenomenon has very recently occurred where 3/4 of patients presenting with rapid onset dysphoria or a sudden conviction that you're in the wrong body are now girls. Without being able to psychologically treat the condition, which often comes with a tapestry of other concerns from anxiety and depression, autism to self-harm, patients who say, "I think I was born the wrong gender," will only be allowed treatment that essentially affirms this belief and starts them on an irreversible pathway to cutting off their breasts, breaking their voice, developing permanent body hair, and likely rendering themselves infertile. While there are many patients for whom transition may be the answer, when treated psychologically, a staggering 80% of those with dysphoria will come to terms with their natal sex without having to resort to major and permanent, dangerous and invasive surgical procedures to treat what is a mental and not physical condition. It seems to me we are pushing vulnerable girls to the brink of sanity, where culture and society forces them to question their developing bodies, but in an increasingly sexualized and misogynistic world reinforces that it is far better to be a man, while then yanking away the only lifeline they had to getting the help they really need by instead pushing them in the direction of permanently becoming men. No, it's not a sick dystopian dream. This is modern Britain, and decisions the government makes right now could condemn a whole cohort of young people to a life of suffering. As the consultation on the conversion therapy ban comes to a close in a matter of days, today, we really need to talk about conversion therapy. Joining us now is Sinead Watson, who originally underwent medical transition between 2015 to 2019 before recently detransitioning. Sinead, it's fantastic to have you on the show. Talk to me about your personal journey.
Well, thank you for having me. Well, you said it very accurately there. I did medically transition. You can hear it in my voice. You can see it in my facial hair. I struggled with gender identity for a number of years. I really did believe that I was born in the wrong body and that medical transition would solve all my problems. When I went to my gender clinic, they were very affirmative and there was no questioning, was no challenge. And so I underwent the medical irreversible aspect only to realize that, in fact, my gender distress had been caused by abuse and other very unpleasant things that I very much was in denial of. So I have a very strong opinion about this conversion therapy bill because technically it would say that exploratory talk therapy is conversion therapy, whereas I know that exploratory therapy would have saved me a lot of pain had I been given it.
Strange. This whole debate we're having a lot around trans rights, around teenagers being given hormone blockers to buy them time before they hit puberty to make those decisions. It seems to me that we are continuously talking about and treating gender dysphoria or body dysphoria as a physical problem by encouraging people to have medical intervention with hormone therapy, with even going under the knife. And not saying, well, hold on, there's nothing wrong physically with your body, so this has to be within the mental space, and let's try and treat that first. Do you think that we really should be encouraging teenagers to go through far longer periods of having psychological or psychiatric treatment rather than just saying, OK, we're sympathetic, we're tolerant. If you believe you're born in the wrong body, then let's make sure that your body changes?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that there has been an absolutely just stunning surge in the number of people now having gender identity issues. This isn't some conspiracy theory on my part. You can get the data from the clinics themselves. What you can't get from the clinics themselves is a reason why. So we know there's been a massive surge. It's specifically affecting young women and girls. And yet no one can tell us why this has happened. So I think before we rush into irreversible transition, which unfortunately comes with a lot of health risks as well, we should be able to gently explore and challenge these people to make sure that they are actually making the right choice, because you can't undo it when you start it.
And Sinead, how do you feel now, having gone through the medical, clinical, hormonal therapy to transition, because the changes that's happened to you bodily are going to be permanent, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I stopped taking testosterone over 2 years ago, and the reversal of the effects, you know, you can hear it in my voice and things like that. Largely, I've remained the same. There's been very minimal changes. And so I'm deeply, deeply concerned, not just because I personally experienced transition regret, but I've also spoken to so many other D-trans, and their stories would break your heart. So I really, really do think we need to be careful here.
And I mean, when you interact with other people online, when you say you're speaking to other people who are also questioning whether they should have transitioned or questioning whether to transition, you spoke about this massive explosion in us talking about these sorts of therapies. Do you think that things like social media is creating a mass hysteria about this, and the governments who are rushing through legislation, as our government appears to be doing, when we look back in a decade or 2 decades' time, will have actually condemned a lot of young people to lives of misery?
Yeah, I can very confidently say what main facts people are trying to identify social and the internet. Especially this bill. I mean, you know, Dr. Adam Jowett was commissioned by the Government Equalities Office to a study which defined conversion therapy as any effort to change one's sexual orientation or gender identity. But no one seems to be able to identify what gender identity is, because according to some people, it's innate, you're born with it, and it cannot be changed. But according to others, it's fluid and can change over time. So the messages that people are getting online are very confusing. And so I don't understand why the government is trying to push this through when they can't even define what it is.
Yeah, I mean, reckless, in my opinion, is an understatement. Sinead, thank you so much for coming on. Let's stay in touch. And can I just say, I think you're utterly heroic to come on national television and talk about this with such candour. We really appreciate your contribution. That's Sinead Watts.
Thank you very much.
A detransitioned woman. Well, joining us now is journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler. Now, Sam, having heard what Sinead has gone through and her reticence, to put it mildly, as to this government legislation being pushed through, what's your reaction? Do you think that it's absolutely right that the government goes full steam ahead with the conversion therapy law? Or do you understand from what Sinead is saying that there could be major pitfalls that we're just not thinking about?
I think the problem here is that the government have been dragging their feet for quite a long time on this one. Theresa May initially said this was going to happen back in July 2018. So obviously here we are over 3 years later. And my heart goes out to Sinead, but at the end of the day, we run the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater on this one, because the majority of this bill is to do with, for example, the consultation was to do with religious groups, etc. And we were worried about if people wanted to pray the gay away, etc. I think there is a danger of conflating gender dysphoria with gay conversion therapy, because I don't think they're the same thing. And as Sinead said, I don't think if somebody is going through gender dysphoria, they should be able to have counselling and to discuss it. And I don't think, obviously, they should be, taken straight away at their word and we'll just go ahead with hormones. And I don't think that is really the case most of the time either.
But, let's go back to talking about the gay conversion therapy here, which you say the majority of this legislation deals with. We actually ban in this country already physical or medical gay conversion therapy. So essentially, you think it's fine that the government says to those people who might be religiously devout and fundamentally believe inside themselves that they want to have, say, a religious or spiritual intervention to help them come to terms or change their sexuality, that must be banned as well?
Yes, absolutely, and I think that includes like Jane Ozanne, who was in the group, the think tank initially with the government, who left it last year. She says that people over 18, even still, they shouldn't be able to give consent, because following religious doctrine is a mental condition in itself half the time. So I absolutely don't agree that even if somebody is religious, they can go to their pastor, because there is no doubt that they will be trying to be convinced to pray the gay away, and they are in the wrong, and their feelings are wrong, and that in itself obviously is highly damaging for somebody's mental health.
You've made a couple of generalisations here, because first of all, you talked about, when we're talking about the body dysphoria, you said, well, most people aren't hurried down a path of being, encouraged to have hormonal treatment or go under the knife. And then you're equally saying, well, most people who might speak to their pastor about it will be told to pray away the gay. But the fact here, we're talking about beliefs in general, aren't we? Someone who believes that divine intervention or the intervention of their religious leader will be of benefit, and somebody who believes they're born in the wrong body. So why is one permissible and one has to be criminalised?
Well, because with the case of praying the gay away, for example, we know which way it is going, and religion has been obviously at the very centre of some of the worst conversion therapy businesses in the whole world. Obviously we're talking about this country, but you only need to look elsewhere overseas, and religion is, at the heart of the most diabolical things that people do to homosexual people. So religion has no party in this situation at all. As far as gender dysphoria goes, then yes, I do believe that people should be able to speak about it. And also, the trans people that I know and are friends with go through years and years and years of therapy before anything happens to them that is irreversible. Years.
It might do that now, but the point is this legislation might actually prevent that. And then can you see that it creates a big problem if all of a sudden trained psychotherapists or trained psychologists or counsellors are in fear of eventually saying to people, giving them talking therapies with the end goal of making them comfortable with their natal sex, that if they suddenly think, well, I could be found liable of criminal activity by essentially, if someone says they're a man, converting them back to the female body they're born into, is this not actually going to be a major disservice to all of those people out there who are going through the very complex process of questioning their gender?
No, I agree. And having not seen the legislation myself, I couldn't necessarily comment on, on scaremongering, saying that, oh, if I say that, I might be, put up in the clink, etc. I believe in our justice system, and I believe that, if cases were brought to the courts, and when someone had been in the wrong, then yes, of course they deserve, to pay the punishment. But at the end of the day, this whole bill is to do with protecting people, and all across the board. So, I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us today on the Afternoon Agenda. Massively appreciate your input. That's Sam Bowler, who's a journalist and a broadcaster. Well, we're also joined by Bob Withers, who's an analytical psychotherapist with over 30 years' experience in the field, who is part of a group of concerned practitioners called thoughtful therapists. What's your reaction to this bill? And the two guests you've heard so far, you've had Sinead saying she thinks that this is going to create a massive trap where people are constantly affirmed and then encouraged to seek very invasive treatments for dysphoria. And then Sam, who says, but no, we need this because the government's been dragging their heels and we're massively outdated when it comes to our legislation, when it comes to protecting people against pretty unsavoury conversion therapies.
Well, it's quite a complex field. Even the therapists can't really agree how to work. There's a school of therapists which thinks we should affirm people in their trans identity. And there's another school of therapists that thinks we should not really affirm or deny a person's trans identity, but explore where their gender dysphoria is coming from in the hope that they might find a solution to their gender dysphoria that doesn't involve radical surgery or hormones. But even the psychotherapy profession can't sort this out. So the idea of bringing the law to bear on it, the blunt instrument of the law, and the fear that that will put in the hearts of some therapists who might only want to do the best by their clients, I think that could have a very detrimental effect, actually on both sides of the psychotherapeutic debate, because people who wanted to help a person come to terms with their own body, perhaps somebody suffering from body hatred, someone like Sinead who had been abused, and felt uneasy in their body as a result and interpreted that as being trapped in the wrong body and then surgically altered their body, they obviously would really benefit from having psychotherapeutic treatment before changing their bodies. But if the therapist ended up being accused of trying to help the person change their identity, their gender identity, by virtue of reconciling themselves with their natal body, that could result in the person being accused of practicing conversion therapy. In other words, they were attempting to get the person to change their gender identity. Therapists would be terrified that they could then be sent to prison for doing that. And it's not very clear whether or not that would happen. But what is clear is that there are a group of quite extreme trans radical activists who will actually interpret any attempt at working psychotherapeutically with gender dysphoria, or in fact looking at psychological issues that might underlie gender dysphoria. They will interpret that as transphobic, and they will also interpret that as being an attempt to practice conversion therapy. So if one of those trans activists brings a case against the therapist in the law, then the therapist will have to answer that case in a court of law. And I don't think that's really the right place for a therapist to be defending their practice. That should be done in a psychotherapy profession. And the regulated psychotherapy profession has never successfully brought a case of somebody practicing gender identity conversion therapy in the whole history of a thing called the Memorandum of Understanding, which has existed for over 4 years now. There have been lots of attempts to accuse therapists of practicing conversion therapy, and none of the regulatory psychotherapy bodies has yet brought a single case to fruition. So I think the government is bringing popular legislation in to try and prevent something which is not a real danger. I agree with the journalist who just spoke that gay conversion therapy is a terrible thing and it should be outlawed, but no actual respectable psychotherapist would practice such a thing at the moment in this country. They would be struck off from any register. So again, I think this is a piece of popular legislation designed to buy the government support, but it's not really thinking about anything other than a political activist lobby and being popular. It's not really thinking about the people like Sinead that this could harm if proper exploratory therapy is criminalised. I hope you heard all of that.
Yeah, I did.
I've lost the contact with you.
No, Bob, thank you so much for coming on and giving your esteemed professional position on this extremely controversial topic, and nobody else is talking about it. We're proud to be doing that here today on the afternoon agenda. So thank you ever so much for joining me.
There is one thing I could add, actually, which is the affirmative therapists under the proposed legislation. Even the affirmative therapists could be brought under the law, because if somebody retrospectively realises that they've actually been struggling with the consequences of abuse, which have been stored in their body and experienced as body discomfort and interpreted as gender dysphoria, or if somebody in fact has been struggling with being gay but not actually being able to reconcile themselves to that and then altered their bodies, anybody affirming the trans identity and encouraging the transition under the proposed legislation could be accused of practicing conversion therapy. In the second case I've just outlined, from gay to straight. So the move from being a gay man to being a trans woman, for instance, and turning into being heterosexual as a result, under the government's current proposals, that also could be criminalised. So both sides of the therapy profession, the affirmative and the exploratory, are going to be terrified of practicing. And what will happen then is that the drug companies and the surgeons and the medical profession will clean up because they'll be the only act in town.
Yeah, it's harrowing stuff, Bob. It really is. Thank you so much again for offering your expert insight into this. We're going to stay on it rapidly, so we'll speak to you again, no doubt. Bob, it's been a pleasure. Well, we're going to continue this conversation throughout the show. And like I said, no one else is going to be talking about this. We bring you the stories mainstream media won't touch, and important they are too. But we also love to know what you think. So do email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also tweet us at GBNews. And as per usual, we've put a poll up and we're asking, could a conversion therapy ban criminalise well-meaning therapists? Yep, cast your vote so I know what you, the nation, really thinks. Well, lots more to come after the break, including new concerns over the missing children of lockdown. But first, it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The worst of Storm Barra's weather is now easing, but the weather stays unsettled during the next 24 hours with further rain or showers and continued gusty winds in many places. You can see Storm Barra, a dartboard area of low pressure, which deepened rapidly as it made its way across the Atlantic on Monday and the start of Tuesday. Now slowing down and gradually filling, so the worst of its impacts will come down in the next 24 hours, but still the potential for some very unsettled weather overnight. Through the evening, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts possible for parts of Wales and to the Bristol Channel as well. Stays windy in the northeast as well, and showers wrapped around that area of low pressure, or longer spells of rain with further hill snow for northern England as well as Scotland. So we start off Wednesday very unsettled with that low still in place. The winds will be coming down through the day, but it's going to take a while, so still the potential for gales for South Wales and South West England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts. And for northeast Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Western England and Wales, a continuous feed of showers through the day. The weather stays unsettled in many spots. Some drier and brighter interludes towards the east of England, Western Scotland, for example. However, all in all, it's an unsettled day. Expect showers, expect gusty winds, and it will feel cool or cold with all of that weather going on. Into Wednesday evening and overnight, we're going to see further showers coming in from that area of low pressure, especially in the east and northeast, and a few coming through to Western England, Wales and Northern Ireland. A lot of cloud cover, and with that breeze, temperatures generally holding up overnight, but potential for a chilly start for Western Scotland, perhaps one or two spots further south as well. A bright start in these areas, a better chance of sunshine coming through on Thursday morning, and showers gradually easing through the day in many spots. But further rain arrives in the far west towards the end of Thursday. That makes its way across the country on Friday, followed by showers. More rain to come on Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints, over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. In a moment, he calls them the ghost children. A senior Tory has raised new concerns over the missing kids of lockdown. But first, let's have the news headlines.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Simon Pusey. Here are your latest headlines. Yellow weather warnings for wind and snow are in place across almost all of the country as Storm Barra hits. Winds of almost 70 miles per hour have been recorded off the southwest coast of England. The storm has also caused flooding in southwest Ireland. In western Scotland and northwest England, drivers have been warned of potentially hazardous conditions. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is warning the new COVID variant Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta strain. This comes as 101 new cases have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total to 437. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is encouraging people in Scotland to work from home as cases there have risen by 11% in just a week. One of the suspects involved in the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has been arrested in France. Mr. Khashoggi was killed in 2018 after entering the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. He had previously been critical of Saudi officials. Police detained a man at an airport near Paris as he was about to board a flight to Riyadh. Local media are reporting the person was a former royal guard of Saudi Arabia. A Whitehall whistleblower has accused the government of costing lives in its evacuation of people from Afghanistan. The junior diplomat, Raphael Marshall, says fewer than 5% of Afghans who asked for the UK to help to flee the country received assistance. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab has defended the government's handling of the evacuation efforts. And children in the north of England are worse off when it comes to health and education than anywhere else in the country following the pandemic. The new research, called Child of the North, found children there have a 27% chance of living in poverty compared to 20% in the rest of England. Well, that's it from me for now. I'll be back with a full news update at the top of the hour.
Now, a senior Tory is warning that tens of thousands of what he calls ghost children have failed to go back to school following COVID lockdowns. Robert Halfon, chair of the Education Select Committee, says many are at risk of abuse and serious concern should be paid to their safety following the case of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. We spoke about these missing children on the programme yesterday when we discussed at-risk kids in depth. Well, I'm pleased to say we can now talk to Robert Halfon, MP. Robert, what are your main concerns?
One thing to note on the Olympics.
I cannot hear you.
We seem to have a few little gremlins going on in the system today, keeping me on my toes and making sure that I can earn my money. There he is. There's Robert Halfon. That's who we were after. Robert, thank you so much. We're talking, of course, about missing children, those people who during lockdown, we didn't know whether they were attending schools or not. And your concern is there are tens of thousands who just have been lost to the system.
Yes, the problem with lockdown and closing schools for the most part, although they were open for vulnerable children and children of key workers, is that in essence we've had what I describe as the four horsemen of the education apocalypse galloping towards our young people in terms of mental health, educational attainment loss, loss of lifetime earnings and safeguarding hazards. And we now know that It isn't just 200,000 children that have been sent home because of COVID-related issues. There's a separate 100,000 ghost children who barely returned to school at all since the schools were fully reopened. And this is incredibly worrying because we know that some of these children will be facing safeguarding hazards. They're not, their whereabouts are not necessarily known by the relevant authorities. They could be facing, God forbid, domestic abuse, online harms. Some of them may be joining county line gangs. And these were the children that I was speaking about yesterday in the House of Commons.
How on earth do we now locate these children, protect them, make sure that their needs are being met?
Well, I think the government needs to do a lot more. I think they should be working with every local authority and school. There should be proper databases of all the children who've not returned to school since the schools were fully reopened. They need to then develop a programme of outreach, of engagement with the children and their families, and get these children back into school again.
Do you think that your party, this government, has a bit of a problem when it comes to understanding the reality of situations for a lot of families out there who can't afford to feed their kids and might desperately need free school meals, that there was huge pushback against that campaign, who don't seem to own multiple laptops for all their children sitting at home having to do distance learning, who might have to go to work and therefore can't be at home to oversee their children during lockdowns where schools are shut? And here you are, another problem created by government policy where the forgotten children are essentially once again just being forgotten.
Well, I do think, although there was a battle, I do think the government did come up with hundreds of millions of pounds for children with free school meals, and millions of pounds were spent on laptops, but much more needs to be done. There's still a digital divide, particularly amongst disadvantaged pupils who don't have access to computers or tablets. But I absolutely believe that one of the biggest mistakes during COVID was to shut down these schools. Other countries in Europe did not do this. I think it's done untold damage to our young people in the ways that I described at the beginning of this interview. And that is why we have 100,000 children, ghost children, who have been in essence lost. And we don't know what is happening to those children. A lot more needs to be done, a lot more support given to those families, work with local authorities. The school minister and the Secretary of State for Education should have databases on their walls in the Department for Education, monitoring the schools and where these absent children are, and doing everything possible to get them back into school and get them learning again.
You say they should do this, which I absolutely agree with. I mean, no child's life should face, long-term irreversible destruction as a result of government policy. But are they going to do this? And are they going to do this? Are you confident that the government will now pull out all the stops to make sure that these 100,000 ghost children are located and looked after?
Well, the Secretary of State, in his response to me in the House of Commons yesterday, said there was something that the departments were doing. There's a team that's been set up to try and solve this problem, but I think it needs to be rocket boosted. I think this has to be a priority. I always think as a society, we spent so much time focusing on the NHS, understandably, and the NHS has a long-term plan. We focused on the economy, we focused on defence. I think now it's the time to focus on our children and education, because we are denying, if we don't get this right, we're denying the chance of millions of children to climb up that ladder of opportunity and get skills, jobs and prosperity at the top of that ladder. And we need to make sure that we help the most vulnerable children, those children who've fallen off that ladder, and get them climbing up again. And this should be a number one priority, not just for the Education Secretary, but for the Prime Minister as well.
Robert, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you again for championing young people, especially those who aren't from the middle classes, who it seems are all too often forgotten about. It's very important that there are people like you in our Parliament doing just that. So we appreciate it. That's Robert Halfon, who is chair of the Education Select Committee. Now, after the break, a whistleblower's revelations about failings which betrayed Afghans who helped the UK. We'll be back with you shortly.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
The UK's efforts to help vulnerable people evacuate Afghanistan were chaotic and understaffed, according to an ex-Foreign Office worker. Raphael Marshall, who served on the Afghan Special Cases team, told the Foreign Affairs Select Committee that desperate Afghans were ignored and Prime Minister Boris Johnson prioritised animals at the direct expense of people in a series of allegations made against the government. Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary at the time, denies the claims and says the government did everything we could. Well, joining us now is Dr. Noor Al-Hagnasimi, the Director of the Afghanistan and Central Asian Association. Now, hearing that evidence given to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that must deeply upset and concern you, that operation to help Afghans who stood shoulder to shoulder with Allied forces during the Gulf conflicts were essentially left behind amidst havoc.
I know that this was chaotic, unexpected, and very tragic events, what was happening in August in Afghanistan. At the same time, I think that now is the time what we can do to those people who are stuck back home in Afghanistan, who deserve to be evacuated, but also to those thousands of people being evacuated by the British government in August this year. And they are still living in the bridging hotels. The local authorities, they are struggling to cope, as well as how they can find the right accommodation to the huge number of people who arrive in the UK in August. So now this is the time how we can reduce the isolation of those people and give them the opportunities to integrate into the British society, access the services, access education, access the health services, as well as enjoy their life and build a better future for themselves and for their families.
Is it your opinion that there's probably a real risk when applications were not being expedited or processed in a timely fashion, that people who really deserved our help, because we dragged them into a conflict and dragged them onto our side, knowing down the line if there was a change of regime that they would be in the firing line and their lives would be at risk, do you think that there are people who will have actually been killed as a result of the chaos that was that evacuation?
I think Great Britain was the first country which evacuated thousands of people after the crisis started in Afghanistan. But at the same time, we have to understand the complexity of the situation in terms of security in Afghanistan. If you remember, there was a serious explosion in Kabul airport after 2 weeks evacuation of the thousands of people which evacuated by Britain. But at the same time, I think that the British government number of times, including the Prime Minister recently in the House of Parliament, emphasized once again that the British government will evacuate another 20,000 in the near future. And everyone is now waiting for the new scheme will be introduced by the Home Office.
There were some criticisms levelled against that operation, that staff at the Foreign Office, who should have been doing the paperwork and processing the applications, were working from home, not keeping up with their mandates, and refused to do any overtime. Does that surprise you, considering that there were people's lives on the line during that period?
I think now is the time that the government should pay more attention to the grassroots organization, such as, for example, the Afghanistan and Central Asian Association, who is tirelessly working very, very hard. If you remember, during August, during the crisis in Afghanistan, the Afghanistan and Central Asian Association in Feltham became similar like Kabul airport. Thousands of people from 5 a.m. were queuing to get some advice and support how they can evacuate their family members back from Afghanistan to the UK. At the same time, we distributed huge amount of donation to thousands of new arrived people in the UK. So now there is a very important time for the government and the Home Office, how they can work closely with the grassroots organizations where we can tackle the problems faced by the new arrived people.
Thank you so much for coming and talking about this today, and wish you the best of luck as well with continuing to help your fellow countrymen and women who are desperately seeking refuge.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you in the studio as well.
Thank you very much.
Now, after the break, as fears rise over a Russia-Ukraine conflict, President Joe Biden holds talks with Vladimir Putin. We're going to have the latest on that, but first it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The worst of Storm Barrow's weather is now easing, but the weather stays unsettled during the next 24 hours with further rain or showers and continued gusty winds in many places. You can see Storm Barra, a dartboard area of low pressure which deepened rapidly as it made its way across the Atlantic on Monday and the start of Tuesday, now slowing down and gradually filling, so the worst of its impacts will come down in the next 24 hours, but still the potential for some very unsettled weather overnight. Through the evening, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts possible for parts of Wales and to the Bristol Channel as well. Stays windy in the northeast as well, and showers wrapped around that area of low pressure or longer spells of rain with further hill snow for northern England as well as Scotland. So we start off Wednesday very unsettled with that low still in place. The winds will be coming down through the day, but it's going to take a while, so still the potential for gales for South Wales and South West England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts. And for northeast Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Western England and Wales, a continuous feed of showers through the day. The weather stays unsettled in many spots. Some drier and brighter interludes towards the east of England, Western Scotland, for example. However, all in all, it's an unsettled day. Expect showers, expect gusty winds, and it will feel cool or cold with all of that weather going on. Into Wednesday evening and overnight, we're going to see further showers coming in from that area of low pressure, especially in the east and northeast, and a few coming through to Western England, Wales and Northern Ireland. A lot of cloud cover, and with that breeze, temperatures generally holding up overnight, but potential for a chilly start for Western Scotland, perhaps one or two spots further south as well. A bright start in these areas, a better chance of sunshine coming through on Thursday morning, and showers gradually easing through the day in many spots. But further rain arrives in the far west towards the end of Thursday. That makes its way across the country on Friday, followed by showers. More rain to come on Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the afternoon agenda on GB News. US President Joe Biden has today been holding urgent talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin after rising tensions have built up on the Ukraine border. The Ukraine government has sought support from the US, NATO and Western countries amid fears Russia could launch an invasion in the coming weeks, with 90,000 troops already at the border. Alongside warnings from Western leaders, Biden is expected to warn Putin that Russia will face the toughest sanctions yet, should his troops go as far as entering Ukraine. Meanwhile, the UK says it will offer defensive support. Well, joining us now is Robert Wilkie, a visiting fellow from the Heritage Foundation, a US foreign affairs think tank. Robert, great to have you on. What's the latest? Do we know what's been discussed in that conversation? Is it still ongoing?
No, I have not heard, and it has not been reported here on the American media. But you know, I would start this conversation by saying I don't think any of us knows right now what Putin wants. I think the most likely scenario is that he takes concessions from the United States and the West. It's not certain that he would launch an invasion, although he has massed those troops. He would face an army of 250,000 in Ukraine.
Is it risky that Putin is essentially playing chicken with Western countries by almost blackmailing them into giving Russia what it wants with this veiled threat that they could actually go in and seize territory from Ukraine?
Yes, and he's a past master at this, because while he's using Ukraine, our attention is diverted in the Middle East. He just entered into a military cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia. He just spent a weekend with the Israeli prime minister and vowed that Russian anti-aircraft systems would not interfere with Israeli operations against Iran-backed militias. So he is playing this out on many different levels. The problem I see with the Biden administration is that it doesn't know the enormous power that it has. We have the potential to cripple the entire Russian economy. We control the world's reserve currency. We control Putin's company's access and his government's access to international finance. And we have the ability to continue to arm the Ukrainians. The Trump administration switched the Obama-Biden position, which was just to send them meals ready to eat and blankets, and provided them with missiles that could take out Putin's aircraft and his tanks. Biden went back to the Obama policy of providing them meals ready to eat, not a particular deterrent to Mr. Putin.
Is there a risk here that essentially what looks like America consistently retreating from the world stage and being what they always used to claim to be, which was sort of the gatekeepers of peace and democracy in the world? Is there a risk here that the Biden administration is essentially going to be appeasing Putin by sitting down and having a conflab with him?
Right. Well, I think, Alex, you've hit on something. The mainstream media in this country has forgotten Afghanistan. But the hard men in the Kremlin and in the Forbidden City and even in Tehran have not forgotten Afghanistan. They saw the disarray. They saw the breakdown in our relationship with our closest ally, the United Kingdom, and they saw that we left hundreds and hundreds of Americans behind. That is a message that they are pushing to the rest of the world. One thing that we haven't discussed is that the Biden administration made a premature concession to Mr. Putin by cutting down and getting rid of American energy independence and allowing Putin to build that pipeline into Western Europe. So he now has a stranglehold on the energy interests of our Western European allies. And because America lost its energy independence by Biden closing off our ability to explore and develop, oil went from about $30 a barrel under Mr. Trump, almost $90 a barrel. That increases Putin's coffers as well as it does to the Ayatollahs in Tehran. Not a very good strategic decision.
I mean, here's President Biden saying that, if Russia dares set foot in Ukraine, that they will impose the toughest sanctions yet. Are sanctions enough?
Well, we haven't tried them. We certainly have that ability to bring Russia's economy to a halt. But it has to be coupled with a Western consensus that we will stop Putin's aggression by arming not only Ukraine, but also ensuring that our friends in Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria, have their defenses beefed up to offer a deterrent to any Putin moves to intimidate them on that part of his border. We've also forgotten that Putin is weaponizing migrants. He's sending hundreds of thousands through Belarus to overwhelm the defenses of our Eastern European partners in NATO. That is another part of this very complex three-dimensional chess game that he is playing.
Robert, thank you ever so much for your insight on this topic, and we'll be staying up to date with it, so keep in touch. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda. Stay tuned, lots more still to come. Welcome back to The Afternoon Agenda. You're with me on GB News. I'm Alex Phillips, and we are going to be talking about conversion therapy as our main topic today. We are also going to be talking a lot more in this hour, such as Storm Barra, as it makes its presence felt. Snow, heavy rain, 70-mile-per-hour winds, and yet more disruption is expected. We'll be getting the latest live. The Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Here's the socialite provided a schoolgirl outfit for one of the accusers in her sex trafficking trial. We'll be crossing live to the States and giving you the latest. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets today, but believe me, we really need to talk about conversion therapy. Does a proposed ban actually risk criminalising well-meaning therapists helping young people who are confused about their gender identity? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news with Simon.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, this is your news at 5 o'clock. Yellow weather warnings for wind and snow are in place across almost all of the country as Storm Barra hits. Winds of almost 70 miles per hour have been recorded off the southwest coast of England. The storm has also caused flooding in southwest Ireland. In western Scotland and northwest England, drivers have been warned of potentially hazardous conditions. Our Scotland reporter David Donaldson has the latest from one of the world's worst affected areas.
As you can see here in Aviemore, Storm Barra has really taken a hold because heavy snow in the area. Number of cars here parked behind me. Doesn't look like they're going to be going anywhere soon at all. You can also see a bus as well in the background, and it's had real trouble actually trying to get out of the snow. But it's the same in Aviemore, it's the same further down. Dalwhinnie's quite bad as well, and generally across Scotland there's obviously a number of warnings in place, and we're expecting gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour, and obviously, as I said, more and more snow in some areas. 17 centimetres of snow forecast, so certainly Storm Barra very much taking a hold.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson is warning the new COVID variant Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta strain. This comes as 101 new Omicron cases have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total number to 437. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is encouraging people in Scotland to work from home as cases there have risen by 11% in the past week. One of the suspects thought to be involved in the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has been arrested in France. Mr. Khashoggi was killed in 2018 after entering the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. He had previously been critical of Saudi officials. Police detained a man at an airport near Paris as he was about to board a flight to Riyadh. A Whitehall whistleblower has accused the government of costing lives in its evacuation of people from Afghanistan. Raphael Marshall worked for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. He says just 5% of Afghans who asked the UK to help them flee the country as it fell to the Taliban received assistance. He also claims some of those who were left behind were then killed. Former ambassador to Afghanistan, Sir Laurie Bristow, said British authorities struggled to predict the number of people needing evacuation.
In terms of the numbers, I mean, this was always, I think, I hesitate to describe it in these terms, but as a known unknown. We did not know how many people would come forward on the day for evacuation, if that's what it came to, because we did not know how many British passport holders were in Afghanistan on any one day. We had no way of knowing.
Airport-style security is going to be installed in all new prisons as part of a government crackdown on drugs. The zero-tolerance approach in England and Wales will see body scanners, biometric identification and sniffer dogs used on both visitors and staff to try and keep dangerous substances out of jails. And prisoners will be assessed on arrival for drug and alcohol addiction. COVID has affected children in the northeast more than anywhere else in the country, leaving them more disadvantaged in health and education. The new research, called Child of the North, found those children have a 27% chance of living in poverty compared to 20% in the rest of England. Speaking to GB News, Professor Kate Pickett said there were many factors involved.
Because they had more risk factors for poor outcomes prior to the pandemic, and because they actually experienced longer lockdowns than children in much of the rest of the country, those poor outcomes have been exacerbated. So some of it's due to poverty and family livelihoods being lost, some of it is due to loss of schooling, some of it is due to mental health problems. But COVID-19 has exacerbated the north-south divide that we were already experiencing for our children in the north.
And the long-serving Labour MP Harriet Harman has announced that she's stepping down at the next election. Britain's longest-serving female MP was first elected in 1982 and is known as the Mother of the House of Commons. She served in numerous cabinet and shadow cabinet positions, including Leader of the House of Commons under Gordon Brown. In a tweet, she said it had been an honour to represent Camberwell and Peckham for almost 40 years. Well, I'll bring you the latest headlines in around half an hour's time. Until then, it's back to the afternoon agenda.
Be careful what you wish for. Don't base your decisions on the advice of those who won't have to suffer the consequences. You are only one decision away from a totally different life. Act in haste, repent at leisure. All good advice, particularly when it comes to the big stuff, like buying houses or choosing a spouse, having children, and of course, in this day and age, changing gender. And yet, the government today is not only rushing through their own decision to outlaw conversion therapy, guillotining all opportunity to read the small print or conduct an impact assessment, it may also ensure that anybody who questions their birth sex is effectively bounced into immediate medical intervention to change it, rather than talk it out, despite 80% of cases of gender dysphoria responding effectively to psychological therapy, rather than resorting to extreme hormonal or surgical procedures with permanent effects. Today's increasingly intolerant cause célèbre of trans rights seems to have put a firework behind the government, who are now hell-bent on drawing up legislation that could, in practice, see psychologists legally prohibited from offering treatments that would enable those questioning their gender identity to talk it out, rather than pop pills and go under the knife. With the wild proliferation of trans-related online content, high street shops selling breast binders, and a mushrooming mental health crisis beginning to look a lot like mass hysteria when it comes to gender identity, young people are being constantly seduced into doubting their sex before being recklessly ushered towards extreme treatments to change it. Forever. Conservative government? I don't think so, because there's nothing conservative about rushing through laws that could condemn an entire generation of young people to devastating long-term consequences, having already allowed their immature minds to be filled by strangers on social media with a deluge of dangerous mumbo-jumbo. Yeah, it's time we lifted the lid on so-called conversion therapy. Joining us now is psychotherapist James Caspian, who was blocked from continuing his research into detransition at Bath Spa University. We're also joined by Katie John Went, a diversity and inclusion facilitator who's undergone conversion therapy herself twice. I'm going to start with you, James Caspian. I find it fairly harrowing that you were simply doing research into detransitioning, something that we know is now beginning to take place as more and more people seem to be pushed into transitioning. What's gone on there? Why on earth have you been forced to not continue looking into this?
Well, when I began the research in 2015, I was given permission by the university to undertake it. This was because I'd been working for many years in a gender clinic in conjunction with a doctor referring people for treatment. And it had come to my attention that more and more people were saying that they wanted to detransition, that they regretted their treatment. And this was something that had never been researched at all. So it was very important to research it. And I began, and every day I would be on the internet, and I was contacted by a lot of people who'd detransitioned. And I was very shocked to find the numbers rising exponentially back in 2015, 2016. And then the university, when I went back to them with an addition to my research and had to ask for it to go through ethics again, because I wanted to include people who detransitioned without necessarily reversing their surgery. And because lots of young women had contacted me and said that they had not had surgery, but they still were detransitioning. And the university looked at it and actually wrote to me that to undertake, in inverted commas, politically incorrect research could incur criticism of the research and the university. And they also added, furthermore, it is better not to upset people. So we could see back then, 5-6 years ago, that this had become a huge politicized issue, and that we were beginning to see this split in our society.
Lost James Caspian then, but we still have Katie, which is fantastic. Katie is, of course, a friend of the show. Now, Katie, listening to what James Caspian has to say, do you think that we're in a situation that by gagging people, gagging professionals, doing research into detransitioning, that we're actually putting the trans community at risk?
Well, yes, to a degree, because I'm one of those people that actually does believe in free speech and healthy speech. And I think in order to be healthy, including via a psychotherapeutic kind of conversation with people, you have to allow things to be discussed. But that is, quite different from, say, religious conversion therapy or, say, very, very strongly affirmative therapy that is essentially confirmation. So you've got these two polarized wings of therapy here, conversion or confirmation. And actually the real goal of person-centered therapy, the kind that I actually eventually underwent and actually enjoyed, as opposed to the conversion therapy, is the kind that actually supports you on your journey, on your odyssey of becoming yourself, not becoming trans, not becoming a woman, not becoming a man, but simply becoming you. And surely that is the goal of all of us. That is the, the kind of the actualization goal of Carl Rogers style person-centered therapy, is just becoming more you. And that discovery is a series of questions, and it is client-led, but it is not affirming the client to say, well, of course you're trans, or absolutely you are not trans because that's a sin. So those two extremes to me are both extremes, and they're both dangerous in their own way, because what we shouldn't be doing is telling people who they are or who they're not.
Do you think we have a problem here that the more we're talking about trans issues, trans rights, body dysphoria, gender self-ID, so on and so forth. The more we're doing this as a society, more and more people might be encouraged to start questioning their gender. And if the government are now saying, well, well-meaning therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists who want to use talking therapy to help people come to terms with their birth sex, that we are conflating what is a sort of mental issue, something that exists in the landscape of someone's interior mind, with physical issues and actually treating physically a problem that needs to be dealt with mentally.
Well, I guess, having been the kind of person who has actually gone through the religious conversion therapy, and clearly it didn't work many, many years ago. And I even went down the whole route of being a missionary and a theologian as well during the whole era. So I went the whole hog on the religious attempt to try and put the whole kind of gender questioning thing back in the box. And I then went through the whole kind of non-religious psychiatric and therapeutic sense of trying to solve it that way too. My own psychiatrist actually called me the most reluctant transsexual he'd ever met. So I'm kind of the opposite of any kind of stereotype or assumptions about trans people, in the sense that I tried everything, heaven and earth and hell, as it were, to try and not be trans. I went across to California to sex and body workshops to try and accept my body. And in fact, I made an internal decision, just as you've described, really, that I would not actually go through any kind of surgical transition until I had found a way to fully accept the body I had, which is actually a paradox, given that gender dysphoria is about not being comfortable in your sexed body. But I determined that I wouldn't make changes until I'd done everything possible to accept, what already existed. And the real paradox is, eventually, when I did go through surgery, and I would say when I went through it, I was probably 80% pro it and 20% still questioning it. But when I did go through it 6 years ago, I've not had a day of regret since. And so, from a personal point of view, actually completing a surgical act on a healthy, relatively speaking, I'm middle-aged and I drink too much, but a healthy body actually did cure my state of mind. So I don't have an answer for it. And I think that's why both James's research and other types of research still need to happen. There's a lot of research that goes on, particularly in the Netherlands and other places, around why are people trans. And I think we have to pursue both angles. Why are people trans? And why do some people change their minds? Have they been, affirmed, confirmed too quickly? I mean, when I was going through being trans, well, not only did I choose to go through therapy, but back then it was encouraged. But since 2012 and onwards, in various countries around the world, there has been a move to depathologize it, i.e. make it not a medical condition, but make it a social, human right, freedom of expression, freedom to say who you are type of point of view, which is the whole kind of move towards self-ID.
Indeed. Katie, thank you so much. We really appreciate an authentic appraisal from someone who has gone through this firsthand. Katie John Wentz, who's fast becoming a great friend of this programme. We're joined now by Emma Best, who is a Conservative member of the London Assembly. Emma, thank you for joining us. Where do you stand on this matter?
Well, I think it's really important, actually. And to be honest, I struggle with the fact that some people are questioning whether we should bring conversion therapy ban in. This is something that the UN have said is something that should happen worldwide. It's in play in Australia, the US, Germany. It's so important to so many because it's not a small issue. When we look at the big LGBT plus study that the government undertook and 180,000 people responded to, 7% of those people had been offered or undergone some type of conversion therapy. And this includes things like, for example, an investigation which exposed a church in Liverpool, which were literally telling people to starve themselves, to starve the gay out of them. And actually, that's the practice we're talking about. That's the thing that so many have recognised and condemned in society for so long. And that's exactly what the Conservative government are trying to make sure is no longer a practice that is in any way accessible or happens in this country. Because believe me, it is happening today. It's not something of the past, and it is something that needs to be tackled. And so it's absolutely right that we bring this in. I think some of the red herrings that people are bringing up about this limiting clinicians' freedom is completely wrong. And I think Liz Truss has made that absolutely clear, that this will not affect the clinical regulatory framework, which will stay exactly the same as it is. So, this idea that somehow we're going to be criminalising physicians and psychologists and therapists is just completely wrong.
Do you not think, putting aside the fact that the government seems to be throwing in gender self-ID, which they can't even agree on what that even means before they're deciding to create legislation surrounding it, is this not also saying, given that in the UK we already outlaw medical and physical versions of conversion therapy, that what you're left with essentially are people who are going to a therapist and saying, I really don't want to be homosexual, or someone going to their spiritual leader, their church, their mosque, their temple, whatever it is, and saying, I want divine intervention over this. Well, surely that's their business, isn't it? What people believe in when it comes to religion, what people want to do and how they want people to help them do that, especially when it comes to things like spirituality, well, it's their business, surely.
And that's exactly why I've made clear that what the types of things we're talking about is, for example, do you think that someone should be able to go to a church and be coerced into saying they should starve themselves to starve the gay out of them? Because starving yourself is not going to make you not gay.
But that is illegal under the law right now.
So actually, so under what? So how are you going to try and get somebody to go to jail over that?
Well, I'd imagine someone can report it to the police, but it is at the moment outlawed for medical or physical conversion. You're saying to someone, starve yourself. That is taking a physical course of action to essentially exorcise, via some sort of strange concept that can change your sexuality.
So, for example, that's exactly what the conversion therapy will tackle. And this is something that's been in the works in 2018. And just to say again, the proposals do not alter the clinical regulatory framework of which healthcare professionals and therapists can operate within. So we're absolutely not talking about changing anything about that. And just to say again, we're talking about something that has happened to 7% of people that responded to that survey and can be really damaging. So, for example, it's something that when we look at those cases of where this happens, it's very important to look at the context of what that's happened in. And you can't bring someone to justice at the moment. And that's why the law does need to be changed. And that's why we need a conversion therapy to be brought in. And just to say again, that's why in places like Australia, in the US, in Germany, in Norway, they've had this at play for a long time. And, it hasn't damaged the healthcare professionals' ability to work with their patients. And actually, it's something that the UN has said that everyone globally should do. It's not something that's poorly affecting the outcomes of patients in other places. And I just think, just to take it back, in 2021, we're genuinely having an argument about whether we should bring in a ban on conversion therapy or not. I think that's, I'm just surprised, really. The facts are there. What's happened to people that have actually undergone conversion therapy, really torturous conversion therapy, is what we're talking about stopping. Nobody is talking about stopping the rights of therapists and psychotherapists to work with people that want to talk through issues, and nobody's stopping people seeking advice. That's absolutely not what's happening.
Emma, Emma, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your take on this hot topic. Love speaking to you. Emma Best there. Now, Jessica Fishburne, she's the mother of a trans-identified son who's found conversion therapy's watchful wait approach hugely beneficial. Jessica, what's your reaction to what Emma was saying there? Are you happy with this ban on conversion therapy coming in, or do you think this is rushed legislation that could have really detrimental consequences?
Personally, I do believe that it is rush legislation, and I think it would be very traumatic for young children and adolescents to have to undergo a path to medicalization, hormones, surgeries for a lifetime. My son, who is now 23, started along this path 4 years ago, just as he entered college. And at the time, when he started college, he was perfectly happy, healthy young man. 4 months into it, I don't know what happened, but he came home and basically announced that he was no longer male, but a lesbian female, transgender. He was immediately placed on hormones. And in the course of probably a year, his body started to change. His face became feminized. He started growing breasts. So he was transformed or converted, if you wish. I mean, I think this is terrible, and especially for young children who will be put on puberty blockers and then go on to hormones. And this is a lifelong trajectory where they have to be on this forever. And it harms them physically and emotionally.
So let's discuss in the context of that the importance of therapy, the importance of actually being able to sit down with a practitioner before you begin any sort of hormonal or surgical intervention in actually saying, I believe I was born in the wrong body, but perhaps there's a way that I can come to terms with the body that I have rather than completely irreversibly change that body.
I agree. And you know, most of these children with watchful waiting, they will desist once they go through puberty. And with my son, actually, I asked him, wait, you're only 19 years old. Just wait till you are fully grown. Once you're an adult, you reach age 25, then go for it. If this is really what you want and you have had therapy and you can look at the underlying traumas, if there are any, whatever emotional issues you may have, then at that point in time, then you're free to do what you want, but not before. He obviously did not agree, and he's gone on to medically transform.
Jessica, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the story. And without doubt, things that tend to happen in the States, it's only a matter of time before we get delivered them wrapped up over here. Well, we're also joined by Debbie Hayton, a transgender teacher and journalist. Debbie, do you welcome this new legislation that really doesn't seem to be having as much scrutiny as perhaps it deserves, with the consultation slashed from 12 weeks to just 6 weeks? Is there a risk we could be setting up a situation that's going to have unforetold consequences?
Absolutely. This is rushed legislation, and it's not thought through at all. The legislation seems to have been brought in for reasons I'm not convinced why now and why this is important. We heard Emma talk about 7% of LGBT people report that they experience conversion therapy, but that survey was self-reported. I filled in the survey myself. There was little guidance on what that meant, and crucially, the question didn't have a time scale on it. So it could have been 20 years ago, it could have been 40 years ago. What conversion therapy is going on now, we're not too clear about. We heard Emma talk about those physical treatments, but you're right, they are already illegal. The government admit that in their consultation briefing document, that those are already illegal. So my concern is what are going to be the unintended consequences of this? Children worry me. but transgender people in general worry me. When we seek therapy for gender dysphoria, well, if my experience was typical, I wasn't questioning whether I was trans or not. I was convinced that I was trans, and I asserted that I was trans. And for therapists to challenge that and question that, they'd be putting themselves in a very difficult, on very difficult grounds legally, possibly worrying about future claims, future historical claims. So therapists are going to be reluctant to work with transgender people. And as it was, I needed that challenge. I needed to be challenged and asked, are you sure? Are there any other explanations for this? Because now looking back, it's that challenge which I experienced 10 years ago, which makes me realize that this was, at the time, this was the path I needed to take. If it hadn't been for that challenge, I really would be looking back now thinking, was this the right thing to do? Your opinions change over time. But my main concern is children. Children are being misled, I believe, by this concept of gender identity. And for a child to sit with a therapist and say, I am convinced I am trans, what therapist is going to risk their professional standing and risk criminal action being taken against them by challenging that child? That, I think, is dangerous, and that concerns me greatly.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It seems to me that children are being constantly bombarded by popular culture with this idea that they should all be questioning the sex in which they were born. And at the same time, it's created a global phenomenon of what's being called rapid onset dysphoria. So people who, unlike you, haven't been questioning or weren't going through the process of questioning their gender, their biological sex over a long period of time, but suddenly say, oh my gosh, I think this has happened. And to me, the two must be connected. And if we're taking the professionals out of the conversation, do you think we're going to end up in a situation where there is an increasing uptake of people undergoing hormonal and surgical therapies that, frankly, they do not require and that they may live to regret?
Well, absolutely. You talk about rapid onset gender dysphoria. We used to joke that gender dysphoria wasn't catching. Well, the evidence is that it is catching. Children in friendship groups, there's clusters of gender dysphoria, and if children are transitioning or identifying as transgender in these clusters, then there is a social factor going on. It's what children are learning from each other, learning from lobby groups, learning from peer groups on the internet. Certainly that was my experience when I started talking to other people about my gender dysphoria. That's when it became worse, and that's what led to me transitioning. So this is real, this impact on groups and impact on children. And quite frankly, if children can't get impartial support and challenge from therapists, who will they listen to? And if they're not listening to therapists, it will be lobby groups and it will be peer support groups. And those groups haven't got the ability or the expertise to give those children the help that they need.
Yeah, worse still, they'll be listening to the algorithms of social media. It's all very harrowing. Debbie Hayton, thank you so much for coming on. Debbie is a transgender teacher and journalist. Coming up, we're talking to the manager of a cafe in Scotland who's been helping to feed care home residents after locals were left without power. First, it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The worst of Storm Barrow's weather is now easing, but the weather stays unsettled during the next 24 hours with further rain or showers and continued gusty winds in many places. You can see Storm Barrow, a dartboard area of low pressure which deepened rapidly as it made its way across the Atlantic on Monday and the start of Tuesday, now slowing down and gradually filling, so the worst of its impacts will come down in the next 24 hours, but still the potential for some very unsettled weather overnight. Through the evening, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts possible for parts of Wales and to the Bristol Channel as well. It stays windy in the northeast as well, and showers wrapped around that area of low pressure, or longer spells of rain with further hill snow for northern England as well as Scotland. So we start off Wednesday very unsettled with that low still in place. The winds will be coming down through the day, but it's going to take a while, so still the potential for gales for South Wales and southwest England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts. And for northeast Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Western England and Wales, a continuous feed of showers through the day. The weather stays unsettled in many spots. Some drier and brighter interludes towards the east of England, Western Scotland, for example. However, all in all, it's an unsettled day. Expect showers, expect gusty winds, and it will feel cool or cold with all of that weather going on. Into Wednesday evening and overnight, we're going to see further showers coming in from that area of low pressure, especially in the east and northeast, and a few coming through to Western England, Wales and Northern Ireland. A lot of cloud cover, and with that breeze, temperatures generally holding up overnight, but potential for a chilly start for Western Scotland, perhaps one or two spots further south as well. A bright start in these areas, a better chance of sunshine coming through on Thursday morning, and showers gradually easing through the day in many spots. But further rain arrives in the far west towards the end of Thursday. That makes its way across the country on Friday, followed by showers. More rain to come on Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. In a moment, the latest live on Storm Barra. But first, it's the news headlines with Simon.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey. Here are your latest news headlines. Yellow warnings for wind and snow are in place across almost all of the country as Storm Barra hits. Winds of almost 70 miles per hour have been recorded off the southwest coast of England. The storm has also caused flooding in southwest Ireland. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is warning the new COVID variant Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta strain. This comes as 101 new cases have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total to 437. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is encouraging people in Scotland to work from home as cases there have risen by 11% in the past week. One of the suspects involved in the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has been arrested in France. Mr. Khashoggi was killed in 2018 after entering the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. He had previously been critical of Saudi officials. Police detained a man at an airport near Paris as he was about to board a flight to Riyadh. A Whitehall whistleblower has accused the government of costing lives in its evacuation of people from Afghanistan. Raphael Marshall, who worked for the Foreign Office, claims just 5% of Afghans who asked the UK to help them flee the country as it fell to the Taliban actually received assistance. But Boris Johnson defended the UK's efforts and says it was astonishing to get 15,000 people airlifted out under difficult circumstances. That's it from me. I'll bring you a full news update at the top of the hour.
Heavy snow is already hitting Scotland as Storm Barra sweeps across the country, although it is not expected to be as severe as Storm Arwen, which hit the UK 11 days ago. Forecasters are predicting winds of up to 80 miles per hour in southwest Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland and Wales. We can now go live to our home and security editor, Mark White, in Hawick in Scotland. Mark, what's the latest? You look a bit chilly.
Yeah, it's very, very cold indeed here as one of several fire engines have passed on their way to some incident in the town. But in terms of the snowfall, thankfully, it stopped. We've had the latest band that's come through the town about an hour, a couple of hours ago or so, on the roads just north of the town on the higher routes there. It was pretty tricky for a while. The snowplows in this area have been doing a great job though. A number of them out and about today, just keeping that main trunk road heading out towards Edinburgh or south towards Carlisle open. But of course, it's not just this area. It's really from Manchester north. They've been getting flurries of snow whipped up in the wind, which has caused drifting in places right up through the southern uplands into the southern highlands as well. Our reporter Davy Donaldson was up there near Aviemore in blizzard conditions. And of course, thankfully, we're told that this storm Barra is on its way out, having crossed the Atlantic, deepened very significantly before striking the west coast of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and then heading into the UK. It's now moving out. It will still be there. There are still clouds that are circulating, but by the end of tonight, we should have seen the last of the snow. We have got, of course, concerns about those homes that have been cut off and without power in Northumberland now for 11 days. We are down to about 500 homes that are still without power, but that is shocking to contemplate that. In addition to that, 5,500 homes, we're told, in Northern Ireland without power, 500 in Wales, and 50,000 almost in the Republic of Ireland.
Mark, thank you very much. You need one of those big GB News golf umbrellas up there with you. We should get some commissioned. Well, there are, of course, human stories behind the images of snow and strong winds. When they were left without power for days after Storm Arwen, Cafe 83 in the Aberdeenshire village of Kemnay took hot drinks, soup and mince pies to a nearby care home where residents were huddled in reception, trying to keep warm. Joining us now is Andy Hutchin, the manager of Cafe 83. So what happened? I understand the power was cut and the residents of the care home were in a bit of a desperate predicament.
Yeah, so most of the residents in the care home are regulars of ours at the cafe. And so when we realised that we had no power, we guessed that they would obviously have no power either. So we decided to set up a barbecue, speak to people who had gas still, try and get some hot water, provide hot bacon rolls and tea and coffee. We popped down to the care home and they were all huddled up in the reception, so they were very pleased to see us.
The reaction, I'd imagine that they were incredibly grateful for your intervention.
Yeah, they were very grateful. They've all been back up this week since the power's been back on to say thank you and to support us.
And what's the situation like now? Is the worst of it over where you are?
It seems to be that way. Most of the power seems to be back on. Just seems to be more secluded farms and stuff that are still without power. But I think the majority of the population have got power. And hopefully tonight doesn't get too bad. And we can keep that power for a bit longer.
Andy, thank you so much for coming on. And hero of the hour in Scotland, Andy Hutchin from Cafe 83. If you live in the region, go and say congratulations to that man. Hasn't he been a good citizen? More of that, please. Still to come on the afternoon agenda, it is, of course, time to hear what you think about our big discussion today, which is the government's conversion therapy bill. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell laid a schoolgirl outfit out for a British teenager to wear before Jeffrey Epstein engaged in sex acts with her, a court has heard. The British socialite is accused of leading the alleged victim, who was 17 when she first met Epstein, to a massage room at her London home and presenting her with massage oils to use. Maxwell is accused of preying on vulnerable young girls and luring them to massage rooms to be molested by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. She denies the charges. Well, let's cross to the States and talk to Anne Bremner, a trial attorney and legal activist. What's the latest that you can tell us about the case?
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. Well, it's been quite the case out here, of course. The question is whether or not she's a madam, so to speak, or the lady of the house. And we've heard new revelations about a lot of money that Jeffrey Epstein had wired to her, I think 30 some odd million. And it's a fascinating case and one that's riveting people here, except for it's not on television. You know, it's in federal court. And that makes it difficult, I think, for everybody here, you know, to follow in great detail. But every day there are huge revelations in that courtroom about her involvement, her claimed involvement with Jeffrey Epstein.
I mean, the British media sort of tentatively covering this, as you can imagine. Is there a risk, essentially, that the trial will probably be prejudiced because of the furore around it, because of the big names involved and the very nature of the allegations being levied against Maxwell?
Well, the only thing we've really heard so far about big names are people that were on the plane, the one they call the Lolita Express, or, you know, visits to the White House alluded to, things like that. I really think, you know, this is a real, you know, major case in terms of big names outside the courtroom. But inside the courtroom, we're not hearing that much about bigger names. We're hearing really about the details about these claimed victims and how they were victimized by Jeffrey Epstein. He's like the ghost in the room. I mean, it's really about him in this case, but then, of course, about Miss Maxwell and her assistance, participation, claimed participation, and basically being like a co-conspirator through all of it. But he's not there, and she is, and she's sitting right there in the defendant's chair.
I mean, we're beginning to hear drip fed to us what's going on in that courtroom, the case of the prosecution, and various people coming forward giving their own testimonies as to their interactions with Ghislaine Maxwell and allegations of what she may or may not have done and the involvement she may or may not have had with facilitating Epstein to commit pretty horrible crimes. But what can we expect to hear from the defence, do you think?
Well, I think this reminds me in some ways of the Michael Jackson.
Afraid it looks like we have lost Anne Bremner there. It's been a day of glitches, hasn't it? So we're just going to try and get her back. Remember, you can continue to email the programme, gbviews@gbnews.uk. There's a lot of you who have been talking to us already, so keep those coming in. We can actually go back to Anne Bremner now. Thankfully, something's on our side. I blame all the storms going on in the UK. Anne, sorry about that. Glad we've got you back. We've got a number of fantastically named storms bombarding various parts of the country right now, so we're going to blame the weather in true British style. So we were talking about what the defence might be putting forward, and you were comparing it perhaps to what Michael Jackson went through.
Yeah, because and I covered a lot of that trial as a lawyer, as an analyst, but the allegations were so sordid, you couldn't really repeat a lot of them on television, and so that's kind of like the Maxwell case. What we hear, general words like abuse, a sex act, things like that. But we really don't get the true information that this jury is hearing about the true and more sordid details about what's alleged against Maxwell, but also against Epstein. And I also think that you're seeing a defense here that's similar to the Theranos trial, Elizabeth Holmes, that's being tried on the West Coast while this is on the East Coast, of portraying these women as victims. We see some portrayal of Maxwell as being basically a victim of Epstein and not somebody that was a perpetrator. And that's what we're seeing in the Theranos trial. It'll be interesting to see if it's effective, but we're seeing that on both coasts of women on trial in high-profile cases.
What sort of coverage is this getting in the US? Is sort of coverage being largely marginalised and locked down because it's a live trial, or are the gossip sites and social media and the like full of the scandals that are unfolding in that trial?
Well, I didn't quite hear you on the sound, but I think we're talking about the media covering these kinds of cases. But I think that at least in the Maxwell case, you're seeing a lot of victim advocates there. You see Lisa Bloom, who I know, who's representing a lot of the victims in this case. And you're seeing the victims speak out outside the courtroom, and then additional quote-unquote Me Too witnesses testifying that are not charged victims, but are showing evidence of basically of a pattern by the defendant and by Mr. Epstein of trafficking and of sexual abuse. I mean, this case is high stakes for her. I mean, she's basically in a position where she can spend the rest of her life in prison after living a completely charmed life with great wealth, going all the way to the beginning of her background. She's an Oxford-educated individual and somebody who's really never had to suffer in any way before. She's also talking through her lawyers about how much she's suffering in jail, and her family's going out claiming human rights violations, etc., given her treatment while she's been in custody. So it's really going to be a stark contrast for her if she is convicted in this case.
Now, one thing that might surprise a lot of viewers is that the one household name really that we know of those people who have said that they were abused by Epstein and that Maxwell was involved is Virginia Giuffre. She is the big name that we know about here, particularly in connection with Prince Andrew. But she's not going to be making any sort of testimony herself, is she? She's just doing, I think, off-the-record briefings. Why is that?
Well, I mean, nothing's off the record if you're briefing, right? It's hard to say. I think I saw somewhere about what her defense has cost so far, and it's staggering what she's paying for lawyers in this defense. And you're the Southern District of New York, which is a very strict and kind of brutal jurisdiction for defendants. It's about the toughest place she could be tried in the United States. So it's an uphill battle for her. She has some good lawyers, obviously, and they're from all over this country. They're not just from New York, but I think they've got a plan and they've got themes. And they even asked for the portrait of Jeffrey Epstein to be taken down out of the corridors of the federal courthouse in Manhattan. And that wish was granted. So his portrait is taken down, but he's still front and center in that courtroom.
Now, how long do you estimate we have to go? And when can we expect the trial to wrap up and possible sentences to be doled out?
Well, I think this is a pretty unpredictable trial. What I do, because I've been speaking some about women in this case and women's defenses, you've got a woman judge, you've got women prosecutors, you've got women defense attorneys. I think women should rule the world, frankly, myself. But you've got some unpredictability in terms of timing and how long this is going to go on. There's a lot of legal rulings that have been made so far, including not allowing certain sorted photographs and evidence, but then allowing great amounts of evidence that was gathered in the execution of search warrants. So the trial will kind of have these stops and starts, but dependent upon this court's rulings as we go along, we're going to have a real question about whether or not we're going to have a more lengthy trial or one that's more confined. But she's tough on both sides, and she's running a tight ship, so I think it'll be expeditiously handled.
Now, of course, the big name in the UK, loosely connected with this trial, is, of course, Prince Andrew. We haven't been talking about it that much over here. It doesn't surprise me that we haven't. But what sort of discussion is going on about his potential involvement with all of this?
About Epstein's potential involvement?
About Prince Andrew's connections with Epstein and accusations that he indeed may have been one of the people who perpetrated offences against some of these.
I mean, it's like, you know, the whole thing about being in lockstep. And the fact is that she had a romantic relationship with him, supposedly, but she was very connected to him. And there were these, basically these books of rules that were handed out, and then she gave out the edicts to what everyone needed to do in the household and what to do around Epstein. So you're talking about a business relationship, you're talking about a romantic relationship in the past, you're talking about a business relationship, but you're also talking about a relationship of trafficking and pedophilia. And that's what the government has to prove. That's hard to prove, but they've got plenty of evidence, and they've got a lot of victims. Finally, they were allowed to bring in evidence of what the claimed victims got in these multi-million-dollar compensation fund monies from Epstein. But that can be argued by the defense that they have a motive to fabricate because they want money. But guess what? They already got the money. So the fact that they're testifying now, you know, shouldn't be maligned by the fact that they were taking monies that were offered through a fund in the name of Epstein.
And it's been wonderful talking to you and getting the latest on this ongoing trial. It's fascinating stuff. Can I just say as well, your statement that women should rule the world is always welcome on the afternoon agenda. I pretend I'm not a rabid feminist, but I think the viewers know that I am. Anne Bremner, who is an attorney over there, keeping us up to date with the ongoing trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, who, of course, denies fervently all of the charges that have been brought against her. Well, now it's time to hear what you've had to say about our big issue of the day, which is the proposed ban on conversion therapy. And a complex topic it is indeed, because, of course, this legislation being rushed through Parliament is conflating somewhat gay conversion therapy, which I think most people think is pretty bad stuff, and then gender self-identification and denial of that, or talking therapies surrounding that. Now, one viewer has tweeted, "Nobody is born in the wrong body. Many people can feel they're in the wrong body, including those like me, as I had body dysmorphic disorder in my late teens. This issue needs addressing." That's why we're doing it today on the afternoon agenda. Another says, "We don't go to any efforts to turn straight people gay, so I don't see why we should be trying to turn gay people straight. It's religious beliefs that are the problem here. Keep it away from legislators." More of you getting in touch. One tweet reads, "We don't need to talk about conversion therapy because it needs to be banned outright, as it causes harm mentally and physically. It is basically torture under another name. If this was committed during a war, it would be classed as a war crime." Another has tweeted, "People experiencing gender dysphoria need proper support, not a pat on the back, surgery and hormones." And finally, one of you has emailed in to say, "Conversion therapy should be paid for by the person who wants to change their body from a man to a woman or a woman to a man. The media and conversion therapists are encouraging and telling children that they are not happy in their own bodies. Well, it's been a very controversial topic and one that you're only going to find here on the afternoon agenda at GB News. We like to go places other channels won't. You have, of course, been watching GB News, the afternoon agenda with me, Alex Phillips. I'm back again tomorrow, so do join me again from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. I look forward to seeing you. Sorry for some of our gremlins today. I really earned my crust, I can tell you that much. I'm looking forward to a pat on the back from the boss when I finish this show. Coming up next, it's Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. Have a wonderful evening. I'll see you tomorrow.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The worst of Storm Barrow's weather is now easing, but the weather stays unsettled during the next 24 hours with further rain or showers and continued gusty winds in many places. You can see Storm Barra, a dartboard area of low pressure which deepened rapidly as it made its way across the Atlantic on Monday and the start of Tuesday, now slowing down and gradually filling, so the worst of its impacts will come down in the next 24 hours, but still the potential for some very unsettled weather overnight. Through the evening, 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts possible for parts of Wales and to the Bristol Channel as well. Stays windy in the northeast as well, and showers wrapped around that area of low pressure or longer spells of rain with further hill snow for northern England as well as Scotland. So we start off Wednesday very unsettled with that low still in place. The winds will be coming down through the day, but it's going to take a while, so still the potential for gales for South Wales and South West England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts. And for northeast Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Western England and Wales, a continuous feed of showers through the day. The weather stays unsettled in many spots. Some drier and brighter interludes towards the east of England, Western Scotland, for example. However, all in all, it's an unsettled day. Expect showers, expect gusty winds, and it will feel cool or cold with all of that weather going on. Into Wednesday evening and overnight, we're going to see further showers coming in from that area of low pressure, especially in the east and northeast, and a few coming through to Western England, Wales and Northern Ireland. A lot of cloud cover, and with that breeze, temperatures generally holding up overnight, but potential for a chilly start for Western Scotland, perhaps one or two spots further south as well. A bright start in these areas, a better chance of sunshine coming through on Thursday morning, and showers gradually easing through the day in many spots. But further rain arrives in the far west towards the end of Thursday. That makes its way across the country on Friday, followed by showers. More rain to come on Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less.